All right, so before we get started, we have some housekeeping. For in-person attendees, the toilets are just out the door and to your right. In case of an evacuation process, there are staff just outside in an office outside the room who will guide us to the evacuation site. Please ensure that your phone is turned on to silent, and we may be taking photos throughout this morning's event. So if you wouldn't like a photo, please just let myself or a crew know. For online attendees, can you please double check that your microphones are muted? So that will allow everyone to hear the presenter clearly. We'd love to hear your questions. So we do encourage you to put them in the chat box or the Q&A box of the presentation. And if you have more than one person in the room with you listening today, can you please just let us know through the chat tab? If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. And as I said before, the webinar is being recorded. So an overview of this morning's topic. We're very lucky today to have Tim Judd in the room with us today and Dr. Jane Bringolf online. They'll both be talking today around ageing and mobility, safe street design, and a social perspective from an older adult lens. There will be an opportunity for question and answer, as I said before, so please make note of your questions as we go through. So just a bit about Injury Matters. We're for safer people and places. Injury Matters aims to prevent and reduce the impact of injury within the West Australian community. And we do this through advocating and providing education for injury prevention, as well as providing support for people who've been impacted by injury. Today's webinar is delivered via our No Injury program with the support of the WA Department of Health. No Injury is a statewide program which aims to enhance the capacity of injury prevention and safety promotion practitioners to deliver quality injury prevention activities. Via the No Injury program, we provide training events, resources and networking opportunities to support injury prevention across the sector, and I will give a bit more information at the end of today's seminar. We encourage you to head to the No Injury section of our website to know, learn and connect. The planning and design of places, spaces and buildings can assist in the accessibility to important services by the application of improvements to lighting, seating, clear pathways and surveillance of the area from buildings and land use. Good design can reduce injury, and simple improvements can make environments accessible for older adults, as well as increase inclusivity for people with disability. So to explore this topic today, please welcome our first speaker. So Tim Judd is Director at Phil Jones Association. Tim has 22 years experience in the area of transportation and land use planning, road safety, public transport and active travel. Tim is a board member of the Streets for People WA advocacy body, a member of the Cycling Walking Australia and New Zealand Design Innovations Working Group, and a panel member of the Main Roads WA IPWEA Road Safety Panel. As an accredited Healthy Streets practitioner and designer, Tim has vast experience with Healthy Streets, having been on the small industry working group to develop the Healthy Streets design check tool for Australia. So thanks, Tim.
Hi all, thanks for having me today, and hello to everyone online. So I'm just going to be talking today about ageing and mobility and how we should start thinking about designing for an ageing population. This is a bit of research that my colleague Tanya Moran and myself undertook a few years ago. So I will touch on a couple of statistics that may be a bit out of date now, but we're looking to update those as we go forward. But this was really born out of understanding that we do a lot around the country for cycling, and as it increases micromobility, walking is often the forgotten sort of active travel mode, and often left to local governments to plan for, but potentially it's just reactive in terms of putting in footpaths where they're requested. As we have a population that is aging, we really need to consider if they want to stay active and they want to be able to walk around their local neighbourhood and to the local shops, how do we design a transport system that allows them to do that? Also, I'll just touch on that Dr. Bringolf and myself have worked on a couple of projects, currently are working on a couple of projects together, both the guidance for pedestrian planning for OS roads and the guidance for pedestrian and related treatments at signalised intersections. Guidance for pedestrian planning, there will be an industry-wide survey out over the next couple of months to understand from industry how people and how the industry currently plans for pedestrians and plans for both children going to school and older population. So do look out for that survey. I might send it through to a few people here today just to see if you can spread it through your networks as well and get more people responding to that. And that's a project that Jane and I are working on. So population is getting older, as we know, and the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare notes that older people make up a considerable proportion of Australia's population. In 2017, over 1 in 7 people in Australia were aged 65 and over. 3.8 million Australians aged 65 and over, comprising 15% of the total population, and that's increased since 1977. The number and proportion of older Australians is expected to continue to grow, and by 2031, it's projected that will be over 5 million older people in Australia. In WA in 2016, the census data notes that 14% of the population was 65 and over, and WA Tomorrow predicts by 2031 that will be 18% of the population in Western Australia will be 65 and over, which is approximately nearly 600,000 people. We know from a health and wellbeing perspective that health organisations around the world are urging the government to make it easier for people to be active, advising 30 minutes of exercise a day is critical, and promoting the use of active travel has a direct response from government to this health advice. As people get older, they want to keep their independence, which is often includes driving as long as they can. However, a portion do not want or can no longer drive, but still want to maintain their independence while not being car dependent. To ensure older people can stay independent and mobile on our streets, we need to design and accommodate a safe network of connected streets to allow people to get from door to door. Walking is particularly important for seniors, who are less likely than younger adults to participate in vigorous forms of physical activity and are more likely to experience social isolation and less likely to drive a car. Walking is critical to allow older people to conduct day-to-day activities such as shopping and attending places, libraries and community centres, and visiting essential services such as doctors and hospitals. And in addition, the Council of Ageing has collected information that indicates that around 25% of all children aged 12 years and younger in Victoria are cared for by their grandparents on a regular basis, making it increasingly important that there be safe walking opportunities around schools, as the two most vulnerable road user types, older people and younger people, are engaging in trips together. So that's an important part of the work that we're doing, is to understand how we can improve walking to and from school. Victoria Walks also notes that older pedestrians experience an average of 17 fatalities, 147 serious injuries, and 114 other injuries in Victoria each year. The most common crash scenario for older pedestrians is being hit by motorists turning right as they exit an intersection. At unsignalled intersections, motorists should have given way in at least 42% of crashes involving older pedestrians. Vehicles colliding with pedestrians on footpaths and driveways and entrances to car parks comprise of at least 16% of older pedestrian crashes, and 23% of those 85 and over. Increasing complexity of road systems and placing high demands on our senior pedestrians, older people are having to adapt to a higher speed, higher volume traffic system, which largely fails to cope with their special requirements. In 2017, there were 14 pedestrian fatalities in WA, of which 7 were senior pedestrians. Research of aging pedestrians has found that consequences of aging on sensory, cognitive, perceptual and physical abilities and the ability to cope with traffic situations all contribute to difficulties encountered by senior pedestrians. You may have all seen a graph like this, which generally looks at the fatality potential of pedestrians if hit by a motor vehicle. And you can see quite clearly that as speeds increase, if a motor vehicle collides with a pedestrian, the chances of fatality or serious injury, this is fatality, but equal with serious injury as well, the chances increase markedly as the speed increases. So we have our neighbourhoods, our general roads, our residential roads of our default 50 kilometres an hour. We also want our kids to walk to school and ride to school, and we also want older people to be able to walk to the local shops and to the bus stops. Yet the speed's not conducive, and often the walking network is not conducive to the promotion of that. And you can see as well with this graph is split by age. And so for people 60 and over, the chance of them dying as a result of a collision with a vehicle is actually increases quite rapidly beyond 30k an hour. So again, this just gets us to start understanding how we design our system for older people. Injuries arising from falls are major public health and safety issues. We know a study by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare determined in 2010-11 that there are 92,000 serious injuries due to falls in people aged 65 and over, with approximately 30% occurring outside of the home. Victoria Walks in 2013's research report indicated that most relevant factors affecting the walking experience described by older people are related to issues which could directly affect their feet, subsequent balance, and then may lead to a fall. Older pedestrians have significant fear of falling, either while walking along an inconsistent footpath, crossing of a road, inadequate pram ramp crossings, or as a result of being startled or bumped by passing cyclists, or more probably prevalent nowadays, e-scooters. And things like uncontrolled dogs off leashes is a big problem for older people when they're walking. Footpath instances and falls frequently result in serious injuries of older people. And in London, for example, accidents involving falls on footpaths are more common and cause more damage and serious injuries for older people than collisions with vehicles. So how do we ensure the increasing older population can be active and stay healthy through an improved street design network? I did touch on this yesterday, so sorry for those that were here yesterday as well that are hearing this again. But accessible pedestrian routes are a key thing that we really need to start embracing and seeing more of. And that's just a holistic design for understanding the whole corridor and the whole journey for pedestrians. We know 2013 notes that Oxley in 2004 noted that four-road design remains a consistent contribution feature in senior pedestrian crashes. Road design are generally designed for vehicles and young, fit, healthy users. And these designs often compromise the elderly by lacking basic features such as refuge islands when crossing a road, lack of signals to control turning traffic, poorly sighted signals, delineation of travel lines, and pedestrian crossing timings. Accessible pedestrian routes can provide a connected network of safe pedestrian routes to destinations such as bus stops and shops and parks and other community facilities. Tactile ground surface indicators and other DDA aspects are to be provided in a consistent and systematic way and maintained to the required standard. These routes often provide a benefit to all users, but are designed for easier access by visually impaired and mobility impaired people and older people. So the key aspects of an accessible pedestrian route are ensuring that we have safe design for driveways and continuous footpaths, mid-block crossings, raised crossings, curb extensions, controlling turning traffic, and better traffic signals and slower speeds. So essentially, when older people are walking along the route, we need to make sure that there's no trip hazards, there's plenty of room and space for them. If we know there's a high proportion of people on bikes or on e-scooters, we need to look at how we can segregate that, or at least have a wider path to allow that. And then whenever there's a potential conflict between a person walking and vehicles, that's when we really need to be able to control that, whether it's providing adequate refuge as people are crossing the road, adequate signal timings to allow people to get across the signals before turning traffic through them, and then also just generally reducing the speed, especially just within our local network. Arterial roads and higher order roads is a whole kettle of fish different, but for our local neighbourhoods and our local roads, we really should be prioritising for lower speeds and better walking environments. So just a couple of examples of accessible pedestrian routes that I've worked on. There's the Amana Living Aged Care Facility in Coolabuk, and also the Southern Cross Centre in near Coburn Gateway. Both of these facilities are quite close to a shopping centre and other associated community facilities. Yet when speaking to people there, it was quite difficult for them to actually get to these centres if they were walking or if they were on a GoPro, if they wanted to ride a bike. Due to the footpath connections were not very good, they had to meander through car parks, they had to cross quite busy roads with no sort of pedestrian priority. So we planned out the network of what needed to be done to get them directly to where they wanted to go. in the most direct route as possible. So not having to stick to sort of road networks and things, but really seeing where we can provide a direct route point to point. And then look at the points you can see on the plan and online. Hopefully you can see the different yellow and orange marks indicate proposed continuous footpath treatments across side roads, and also improved access points and improved crossing areas as well for crossing the road. So if we plan these corridors as a holistic approach rather than just ad hoc little bits here and there, we can really make sure we have better pedestrian connectivity to the nearby community facilities. And this is within, I can't remember the exact scale of this, but this is within a sort of walking or go for a distance for people that be able to do. Probably need a few benches on the way for people to stop and have a rest, maybe under a nice shady tree. But essentially, it's a journey they could make if it was best designed for them. So I'm just going to touch on a few design examples of what that looks like. So continuous footpaths. This is there's not many in WA, so I was struggling to actually find an example in WA. But here's a type of a continuous footpath in Coburn, which has the material that shows that the pedestrian footpath has the priority across this driveway and side road access. Within WA, within our road traffic code, turning vehicles must give way to pedestrians crossing a road. But the way we design our roads is such that we have a pram ramp. It looks like the pedestrian yields and looks for gap in traffic as you normally do. And most people would not step out in front of a vehicle if they're turning, regardless of whether it's your right of way or not. So it's all designed to allow the vehicle to continue and the pedestrian to stop and yield. Whereas if we had continuous footpaths, then it's obvious to the turning vehicle and to the approaching vehicle that they must stop and allow the pedestrian to continue. As we heard yesterday from a number of people, and I think Lucy mentioned it yesterday, walking can generate quite an effort for people. So the more you have to stop and start and stop and start is quite an effort for a lot of people. Whereas in a vehicle, if you have to stop and start and you're sat in your air conditioning box, listen to music, it's not really a big deal if you have to start and stop a few times, again, within a local neighbourhood setting. So I'd like to start, and I am advocating on most of the projects that I work on to try and get more of these in. Here's another example. This isn't in WA, unfortunately, but this is a simple improvement, again, to making it safer straight through a side road intersection. The footpath has priority, and you can see the give way sign to the side. The vehicles have to stop and give way to the person crossing. Simple improvements as well. This is another one in Coburn, where I'm not sure the process that the council went through to decide whether a zebra crossing went in or what sort of crossing facility went in. But what they did realise is if they just reduced the distance of the crossing, it was better. There's an aged care facility on the right-hand side as people are looking, and there's on the left-hand side, and then there's a shopping centre community facility on the right-hand side. So quite a high number of older people crossing here, both on gophers, walking, and on bikes. So just reducing the crossing distance is a simple solution for this area. And here's just an example in Melbourne, where on the left you can see that an existing intersection was very wide, very open. If you're a pedestrian, you had to cross a big long distance across the mouth of the intersection with not really much refuge or protection to stand, with big sweeping intersections, so vehicles didn't have to slow down too much to come in and out of the intersection. Then on the right, you can see how they improved it. They made sure the median went all the way up to the end of the intersection, so the pedestrian had a nice protected area as they were crossing through. They reduced the traffic lane width, so actually the exposure when you're actually crossing the traffic lanes themselves is less, because there's less time of being actually within the traffic lane. And the intersections are tightened up as well, so vehicles have to really slow down as they're coming through here. So thinking about the graph I showed earlier, if there was a collision with a turning vehicle and pedestrian crossing the road, hopefully the speeds are low enough that the result isn't that the person is killed or seriously injured. So there's a number of things. So this is just a really good example of how we can just do a few tweaks and a few improvements to make it safer for people walking and for older people walking. And you can see with all the additional space that was then provided, there's a lot more greenery in the area as well. And then here, just a simple example of a roundabout. This is one taken from Islands, from CCTV, so it's not too clear, but hopefully you can see the image on the left. Was purely all about traffic, keeping traffic moving. That's the point of roundabouts, and pedestrians. There wasn't really much pedestrian space. You can see someone on the left-hand image just crossed the road, and they would have been within that traffic, exposed to that traffic for quite a while within the traffic lane. And on the right-hand image, you can see that just a simple few tweaks to the curb line, pedestrian priority treatment through zebra crossing, realigning the approach to the roundabout to be a bit more square, so vehicles have to slow right down rather than going zipping through the roundabout. And the simple improvements made that roundabout so much more friendlier for pedestrians and for older people crossing that road. And improving traffic signals as well on signalised intersections. All traffic signals should accommodate for older people, and especially traffic signals in close proximity to areas of high concentration of older people. We need to ensure that traffic signals provide more time to cross for older people, and the walking speed usually set for the design of signalised intersections is about 1.2 to 1.5 metres per second. But on average, we know that older people walk at a pace of around 0.9 to 1 metre per second, which means in many cases they're not able to complete a safe crossing before vehicles start turning. Late starts and parallel walks on signalised intersections are not very good either, and something we are looking at to do. And you can see in this example, again, with the red arrows, if you're crossing from the sort of south of the picture to the north, opposite to the arrow of the red arrow, you'd probably be fine because you'd got to the middle and then carried on with your crossing before traffic is turning left. But if you're crossing the opposite direction, you barely make it to the middle of the intersection before, as you're walking in the departure side of the intersection, vehicles are turning left against you, and then you're stuck. You wait in the middle. You can't because there's no button to let the signals know that you're waiting in the middle. You chance walking across turning traffic. I wouldn't. So again, we're really not set up for walking. And you can see the physical distance someone would have to walk just to get across that intersection as well. It just so happens that the current Osroad project that Jane and I, Dr. Jane Bringolf and I are working on at the moment, which is guidance for pedestrian treatments at signalised intersections. These are some of the things that we're going to look at to see if we can improve that. So basically, the longer you're exposed to traffic, the potential of a crash obviously increases. So improving signalised intersections. So an example in Singapore is that crossing signals are fitted with smart readers that allows people with a senior citizen's card to tap the push button, which then provides an extended pedestrian phase to allow older people to cross the intersection within time. Perhaps the smart rider system could include a similar feature for signals in WA. However, this would only benefit the older people if they remember to take the card with them. And so investing in signals that doesn't rely on the person expecting to provide the call for the button, and instead the signals themselves realise that someone needs more time to cross. Puffing signals are potential for this, which has two sensors at the top of the traffic signals. And the sensors detect if the pedestrians are crossing slower and can hold the red light signal for traffic longer to allow that pedestrian to make their full crossing. And then if a pedestrian pushes the button and then walks off or crosses the road in enhanced, then it can then detect no one is waiting, cancel that pedestrian crossing and cycle it around the traffic as well. Now, these puffing detection systems are being trialled and they are put in. In fact, in WA, they were in and they're starting to be removed. Likewise, in Tasmania and Northern Territory, Tasmania being removed because the technology was also picking up things like leaves blowing and rubbish blowing and things like that as well. So technology is definitely a solution to this, but what sort of technology is still being progressed? I think that would be me there. I'll hand over to Jane now to present, and then I'll just stop back in later on just to finish it off. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'm just waiting for an opportunity to share my screen so that I can, here we go. Okay, share my screen. Okay. All right, now I can.
Sorry, Jane, just 2 secs. I'm just in the. There you go, Jane.
Okay, you want me to start now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so just a little bit about myself very quickly is that I've been working in the community sector, mostly in ageing and disability for many, many years, too many years. But you might be able to see by the wrinkles on my face, it's been some time. And I'm really interested in this whole aspect of getting out and about safely. But first of all, I'd like to let you know that I'm speaking to you from the land of the Darug people here in Western Sydney, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to anyone who is listening or in the room today. Okay, so a lot of what I'm talking about this morning is gathered from information that I got when I was working for Council on the Ageing New South Wales, COGA New South Wales, when I did 23 workshops with local government about, trying to prepare for an ageing population. And the thing with local government, of course, is they work with 10-year plans. And so anything that you talk about today will still take 10 years to actually come about. So here we go. So then one of the things that we talked about in those workshops were who are older people exactly, and really are they all the same? And that was probably one of the main things that I was kind of having to deal with, because there was this sort of amorphous idea that the problem could be solved by more aged care facilities. But of course, as we know, no one really wants to go there unless they absolutely have to. And through the process, I found 5 key factors for getting out and about safely, or even just getting out and about at all, because one of the things we don't know about is what do people don't do because they don't feel safe. So older people are not all the same. We're talking about an age group, if you're going to take it from 65, so we're talking about a 25, 30 year, as long as some people have been in the workforce. I mean, that's the length of time we're talking about. And as Tim was saying, they still contribute, doing childcare, taking children backwards and forwards to school. They obviously are still doing paid work. Look at me. Volunteer hours, look at me, study and learning. I didn't start my PhD until I was nearly 60. So there we go. And the idea that baby boomers just have it all easy and they just go on cruises and have this wonderful home that they own, that's also a stereotype that I like to sort of dismiss, because they are often supporting other family members financially as well as emotionally and other ways. And as we know, most people want to age in their own home, and if it can't be their own home, they want to stay in their neighbourhood if they're going to move. And the other thing is that people spend more time at home and in their neighbourhood as they get older and if they are out of the workforce. And I just want to have a note on language here. Older people is the preferred term, not seniors, and definitely not the elderly. The elderly leads to all kinds of stereotyping. So not separate or special, and not some group that, you can just put over there. And as we can see, this old sign from the UK, I don't know if they still use them, but that is, really stereotyping. And on the right-hand side, we have a picture there of people who are definitely not fitting the stereotype. So what's been mentioned before is the same things that I'm going to be mentioning, and that's footpaths, seating, lighting, wayfinding, toilets. And I found in the country towns, I did quite a few country towns, parking where that's convenient, especially in the smaller towns where there aren't, the big shopping malls where you can go and park and then do your shopping. So that's number 6, but I'm not going to be talking about that today. So here we have some pictures here on the left. This is what happens when you have 2 people with wheeled devices, is someone has to give way, and you can also see how the gravel or the soil or whatever is encroaching there and even making the footpath narrower. The picture in the middle, taking in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, a lovely leafy area, gets cold, deciduous trees, it gets damp, the leaves fall, slippery leaves on the ground, twigs and debris, and the group that I work with there said this is terrifying for them, that they will slip on on wet leaves. So it's not about don't have deciduous trees, it's about maintenance. Similarly, the picture on the right-hand side, the bushes have overgrown the path, and you can see where the grass has been worn away. Normally, landscape designers would call that a desire line, but I would say that's an undesirable line. And, oh, goodness me, the quality of footpaths, the quality of being able to get across a road does vary greatly. So most of my pictures, as you can tell, are from New South Wales, and again, country New South Wales. And on the right-hand side, I've got a picture there that brings up the topic of shared paths. Now, that picture indicates that there was a footpath, and then they added an extension to it for people to use a bike. Now, this is a town with a population of older people that was almost around 40%, as many country towns are in New South Wales. And immediately you can see the access to that, even for a cyclist, isn't that great. And the other thing is the feedback consistently, and I mean absolutely consistently, is I will not walk on a path where there are likely to be cyclists. So it's a bit of a waste putting down all of that concrete, especially where there's no shade, no seating, and thinking just because you could put a path in, people will use it. And I think that's really another case of ask the community before you do anything. You know, let's have a little co-design here. Is it actually taking people to a place where they want to end up? And is it, you know, anywhere near where they live? Or is it just a path that someone thought this will be good for walking exercise? And I think there were a few paths put down on the assumption that if we put down a good path, it will make people walk. Well, I don't think that worked. The other feedback I got was that anything that lifts pavers. Now, we can see from this picture, it's totally level. But the other feedback I got was that pavers also weren't preferred because of the fear of them lifting. Now, I think this is where visual perception might also come into play, is because they might not see it, that doesn't mean to say it's not there, and that makes it, again, somewhere where they don't feel confident to walk. So walking on grass also is not something people want to do, because you just, especially if the grass hasn't been mowed really closely, you can't tell whether there's dips and bumps in the ground that will trip you over. Now, I did hear someone who was promoting healthy aging saying to me that walking on grass is really good because it helps you to maintain your strength and balance. And that might be true. But I think that for older people who are unsteady on their feet, that walking on grass isn't likely to make them, I mean, if that's what they've got to do to maintain their balance, then I think we need to look elsewhere. The other thing is when street works, you know, someone's digging up the footpath or even part of the road, is how that interferes with that path of travel, particularly if you're using a mobility device or you're using a stroller or anything on wheels, really, a shopping trolley. And signs and seating breaking the ability to shoreline. Now, so if you look at the right-hand side of this picture, so what we've got is a really lovely wide footpath, perfect. But for someone who's using a walking cane or trying to use the edge of the building because their sight is limited, as you may know, people who use a cane shoreline, that is, they use the edge of the building to guide them down the street. And where there are gaps, that makes that very difficult. Now, obviously, this local government has a sort of bylaw that says do not put any sandwich boards or signs on near to the shoreline, and that works really well. And so, if you want any sandwich boards or anything like that, you put them to the curb. However, where there's an inset for a shop, they are perfectly legally able to put something there, as you can see, with that stand with some movies and things on it. So, I don't think there's anything we can do about that, but it is worth just mentioning. And of course, footpath clutter. And I think this was taken outside of a council building, and obviously they're worried about someone in a truck or something driving into the building. However, no one's thought about pedestrians. We've got a lamppost, bollards, and we've got electricity or Telstra pit there as well, the green thing. So we've got this lovely wide footpath here. It's all grey apart from the green box. But in the distance, you can see that does narrow down to just a single narrow lane footpath. So again, this looks really, the footpath itself looks really clean and attractive and level, but negotiating these bollards and the lampposts, if you have low vision and using a cane, that could be quite tricky. And again, just a note that people are really concerned about pavers. And here we have a bike rack. Now, I don't know whether the bike rack went in after the cafe put out their seats. I don't know who came first, the cafe or the idea of the bike rack. But as you can see, it's in the silliest of places. So one of the things that needs to be considered, I was talking about shorelining. Cafes are allowed in a lot of places to put their seating next to the shop, as long as it has sort of barriers around it that someone with a walking cane could actually detect. And as you can see, that's not actually done extremely well. And you can imagine sort of someone, it's barely wide enough even for a stroller to go past that. So the good thing is, though, the wheel stops have stopped the cars from actually encroaching onto the footpath, which isn't always the case. Now, here's the thing. These giant buildings that we have, the engineers have taken more recently to having these angled struts to hold the building up. Well, I think that's what they are. If they're not there to hold the building up, that makes the situation even worse, because then there's no reason to have these angled struts that people can walk into without there's no sign, there's nothing, there's not a huge amount of contrast there. It's really easy to walk into those if you've got a guide dog. The guide dog won't know it's there. And certainly if you're trying to negotiate that area as a person using a cane, there's no directional tactiles, there's nothing there. It looks like a really good place to put some seating, so I don't know where that's gone. The patterning is very attractive, but could be confusing to someone with dementia if their perception is impaired in some way. But you can solve the problem. Now, while this isn't necessarily the most beautiful treatment, it does show that you can do something creative and create seating around angled struts so that people don't actually walk into them. And you could actually have make that more attractive by putting planter boxes or something like that. So this is, very functional, but there's opportunity there for more creative design, I think, anyway. Now, I don't know how well you can see that, and this is where photos have an advantage over going to see somewhere, personally, is sometimes it gives you an idea of how people with low vision or impaired vision can see things, or perception issues, how they can see things. But the issue here for me is the disappearing steps. And I think they are a trip hazard just waiting, well, not the trip, these are trips just waiting to happen. There's one little handrail. So as you come out of the building through the revolving door, you need to be able to walk past that column to be able to see the handrail. And there were no other handrails along all of those steps. Now, I call them disappearing steps. What I mean, of course, is that they gradually disappear into the hill as you into the incline as you go up the hill. It would be so much better to break that alignment. I mean, I know from a building perspective, it's easier to just do one straight lot of steps. But if, for example, I'm using my cursor here, if, for example, that was broken by a planter box or something like that, to just narrow the amount of, these steps here, then it would make it narrower for here, and they do the same thing again. It would really make it a lot easier. And then you can have a handrail. Now, handrails are not, there are rules around handrails, and this one here doesn't meet it, I should say, because they're supposed to be extended on to where the footpath is actually considered the last step, not the step itself. Handrails are really important for someone like me who wear multifocal lenses, and when I look down a set of steps, my visual perception is disturbed, particularly if there's no contrast nosings. And I need the handrail, not because I'm frail, but to give me a sense of security that I'm not going to fall down the steps. So it interferes with my fear of falling. And it doesn't matter whether it's 3 steps or 300 steps, it still feels uneasy for me, and I feel so much better if I have a handrail. I'd just like to say something about revolving doors. Now, I know that this isn't necessarily anything to do with walking, but it is a pet hate of mine, and that is that revolving doors are not only useless for people with wheeled mobility devices and trams or trolleys or delivery trolleys or whatever, they're not really great for people, some people with mental health conditions, people with visual perception problems, for people who obviously can't see. And every revolving door, in order to not meet the or get a Disability Discrimination Act claim against them, needs to have a separate door that you can use. And as far as I'm concerned, it's ridiculous having 2 entries like that. Just make the one entry that everybody can use equitably, because what this means is 2 separate entrances means that it's not equitable. And here's a real doozy. I just love this. Now, designers, this is a very clever and creative design, don't get me wrong. It is a mixture of a ramp and steps. And I'm not sure if you can see how that works. Personally, they are known by people who I associate with as stramps. And you can see, if I can get my cursor working here, you can see this little bar here. That is to stop people walking down the middle. Now, as soon as you've got to protect people from a design, that means the design doesn't work. Secondly, if the ramp is this thing here, right, what's to stop a wheelchair from running out of control and falling off the steps? And then you've got the disappearing steps as well. So while you can walk down the sideway here and there's a handrail, that's good. You've still got this part here. So if there's 2 or 3 of you walking down together, someone's going to hit themselves, you know, trip over something like this, or going to have to keep watching their step. These are real examples, and they are often, if you go to Google Images and Google universal design, these sorts of images will come up, because someone in misunderstanding the notion of universal design is that if you can do it for everybody, then it works. Well, yes, technically you can do it for everybody, but certainly from a safety perspective, it's a nightmare. It's absolutely a nightmare. And then, of course, Sydney has a colour palette that I like to call 50 Shades of Grey. And what that means is that everything is the granite grey that Sydney is sort of based on. And even the tactile indicators are stainless steel, which is another form of grey, so that they don't stand out too much, which is completely defeating the purpose of them, because the yellow tactile markers are not only something that people can feel under their feet or with their walking cane, but it also gives people with poor vision a cue that there is a hazard. Now, these are steps. I'm just here. Here we are. These are steps here, and you can see you know, some grooves there that give some slight indication that they are steps. But where's the handrail? It doesn't feel safe to me at all. Now, on the left-hand side, this picture's popped up here, is that while this isn't a pretty picture, and I think we can do better creatively than this, it does show that the contrast nosings really do help. So here I think is a really good example. Again, it's paving. It's it's attractive, and I think this is what we have to think about for people walking. Is it an attractive place to walk? Is it not just the safety aspects, but you'll notice they've got rubbish bins at regular intervals. The shops are on a slightly raised area, and I think that has to do with the history of the town and their likelihood of flooding. But there are ramps, access ramps all the way along, as well as steps. And I think this is in Ballina, and this is one area where the local government has a really strong connection with their older people. And I think that this is where they must have been doing some co-design together many years ago, because I took this picture about 10 years ago. So this is not a new treatment. This is something that's been there for quite some time, and Ballina is a retirement town, and I'd say probably more than 50% of the people there are over the age of 65. So as you can see, it's clean, attractive, it's consistent, and has a good shorelining architecture. So here was another country town, and this was the first time that I'd ever come across a sign that said pedestrians give way to vehicles on something that looked remarkably like a pedestrian crossing. Even though it didn't have stripes or anything, I just thought, my goodness. And I was told that because this is a national highway, pedestrians have to give way to vehicles. Now, I don't know how that works. It's obviously a very wide street. You can tell by the refuge islands in the middle there. And I think what happens there is that people just have to do their shopping on one side of the street or the other, or they stand there until there's a group of other people who feel confident to cross and cross with them. So I don't have any real feedback about how that works, but it's not great. And just a personal note here is there was one time I was doing a town on the Hume Highway, and I was in a motel on one side of the road, and the council offices were on the other side of the Hume Highway. And one time I tried to cross the road to go to the council offices on foot, and then decided that even though I was, only 50 metres away, the next time I was going to the council offices, I was going to do it in the car because I could more safely cross that intersection with the car than I could on foot. And of course, they're still making signs for pedestrians to give way to vehicles, and I think we have to rethink that whole idea. Seating encourages walking, gives respite from pain, time to rest. This picture here is in Rockdale, and there's regular seating all the way along there. And although the paving there is striped, if you squint your eyes a little bit, it could look a little bit like steps to someone who has vision perception issues. And I just to say that backrests and armrests are absolutely essential on seats, and they've got them there. And to avoid funky seating in places like libraries, like I might be able to get into the seat, but will I be able to get it back out of it again if there's no armrest or it's down too low? And of course, seats trees for shade, excellent, but they do need some maintenance, and trees can also create those uneven footpaths. So it's a maintenance issue here. And please, let's have some level pathways to seating. The seat on the right there had been after a lot of rain, so it was totally muddy, and so you couldn't really use the seat anyway. And the blue seats on the left, I think they're just there for decoration because I can't work out how anyone would actually want to sit in this actual place, to be quite honest. And in Brisbane, they have on the South Bank, they've done some really good work to encourage walking. In the evening, in the summer, when it's cool, it's a really nice place to work. But again, those stripes, if you squint your eyes again, could still look like steps. So, and so that you've got those pools of light that can create that sort of vision distortion. And of course, lighting, when we're talking about lighting, it's not just about being safe at night light, it's about lighting during the day or in buildings where you can see signs, you can see menus, and you can sign documents. Glare, really disorienting. And for some people, picture on the left, that looks like the floor is wet. And often the floors don't start out shiny, as we found in the the DDA case in the Southern Sunshine Coast Hospital. It's the treatments of the cleaners that eventually make the floor shiny so that you can't see where you're going. And again, on the right, the glare there. And this is where glare, there is a sign to the toilet. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the sign to the toilet. There were two reasons. One from the glare, and the other was the toilet sign is way up here, a bit out of my line of vision because I'm looking at my feet to where I'm going, and it's in shades of grey, so it blends in. And of course, the water fountains here are obviously splashing, so then you've got these things here to stop you, to tell you that the floor is wet. And again, these little white spots and patterns are not great. It doesn't stop people from getting out and about, it just will slow their progress and makes them not feel quite so welcome. And this was another thing. I was actually looking at my camera after I've taken some photos, and I was using my peripheral vision to walk along this footpath and then suddenly found myself at the curb. So not only can orientation skills diminish with age, you can be looking at your mobile phone these days and be misdirected. Right. Signage, wayfinding. For toilets is essential. So we've got more than one toilet sign here, and in this town there were more directional signs to keep you going in the right direction for where the toilets are. And for older people, the toilets are the key to getting out and about. They will go to the places where they know where the toilets are, where they're relatively clean, and where they've got a good chance of getting in without queuing. So a little more about wayfinding is the image on the right-hand side here is a real image, and the architect said, I didn't want the sign to stand out. So this was actually in a building where it was telling you the floor numbers for the lifts. And just for fun, I put this this other signpost here, which is really just a tourist information sign in a new format, but it is an extreme example about how you can have too many signs together. So good colour contrast, no fancy lettering. Landmarks are helpful rather than just signage, or just as well as signage, and using architectural view cues and, you know, away from other visual noise. Oops. Now I got to Rockdale Beach and I saw this contraption, this building, and I thought, what is that? And I had to walk all the way around it before I found out that it was a toilet, because I couldn't even see a sign. So unfamiliarity of a building, yeah, it looks great. I think it's excellent. But a few more signs as to what it is would have really helped. So toilets, absolutely essential, as I was saying. There needs to be some parking nearby if it's a sort of an isolated toilet like this on a beach. As you can see, this one has locked doors. Not a good idea. And just a note that the accessible toilets are supposed to be open to the public at the same time as the ladies' and gents' toilets are open to the public. They should not be locked at any other time. The purpose of this locking and the MLAC key is so that the toilets are available after hours. However, that is not well known here in New South Wales. So they also need to be well lit. And in shopping centres, not only do I need the way in, but especially if one of these corridors that twists and turns before you find the toilet, but I also need a way out sign to tell me how to go back to the shops, because I get lost really easily. And there was a dreadful story of a man in Bondi Junction, Westfield, who went the wrong way and ended up in a stairwell, a fire stairwell, where he could get in, couldn't get out, and he wasn't found for 3 days. And that's a real case because the police actually asked me to comment on it. And so if we're going for a walk, let's make it easy for people. This is a really nice picture here. It's my older person's Abbey Road on the left. But as you can see on the picture on the right, that just after I took that picture, there was another one where they didn't all get across the road at the same time before a car was wanting to turn into their roadway, and at the same time another person pushing a wheelchair had joined them into this very tiny space of a pedestrian island there. So fortunately not a lot of traffic on this road, small country town. The 4 ladies there were heading back to their retirement village in the distance there. So really, I think there should have been a proper pedestrian crossing there. So let's watch everyone's step. If you have to put signs up like this, then it's time to refurbish and change that because most people will watch their step after they've tripped over that. So this is me coming to the end of my talk, and you can find a short version of all of that in the age-friendly checklist, and you might want to make a note of that. I'm sure there'll be sharing of the slides later on. And we have a library of information and research that you can access anytime. And find out what we have there. And I just want to say thank you, and inclusion is for everyone. So I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you so much for that, Jane. We will have an opportunity for questions. We'll just finish off 10, sorry. Just not sure.
It was great from Jane. You can see why I all enjoy working with her. I always learn something all the time. It's so much wealth of knowledge. So I was just going to wrap up. Again, some of this I spoke about yesterday at the summit. So apologies for repeating that for those that were there. But it's just touching on healthy streets and the healthy streets approach of how we can tie all this back in, tie in what I spoke about earlier, designing for older people, and what James touched on for universal design. Healthy streets approach is an approach that we talked about yesterday at the summit, so I won't go through that. But an example that I showed yesterday is just how we can make space more equitable within the road network. None of this is sort of anti-car or anti-anyone, it's just a bit more equity in space. So the image to the bottom left is existing Archer Street in Victoria Park. And the image to the right is how we've envisaged the design that's currently going through final design process for implementation, which will just reallocate some of that sort of no-man area of informal parking and very wide traffic lanes and central median. It doesn't really do anything for anybody by widening the footpaths, which allows more space for benches, as Jane was discussing, and trees, cycle parking, and wider footpaths. And then slower traffic. So again, reducing the distance for people to cross if they need to cross the road. And then as we go along that Archer Street, Min Street corridor within Carlisle, within Victoria Park, adding in protected cycle lanes, which again reduce the width of the traffic lanes, so it's easier for people to cross, adding in pedestrian priority for people to cross, and adding in space for more greenery and more street trees. And other street furniture. So what a protected bike lane can look like is something like this. The image is a bit blurry, but this is from one that was put in Melbourne. I've designed a few in WA, and they're currently being for a process of being constructed. But again, it just provides additional space for people to use in a protected environment away from vehicles. And it also allows for people in wheelchairs, people in mobility devices, people on faster e-scooters or bikes to share a space away from the footpath. We've talked about space for walking, and these are just a few examples of from a healthy street perspective. You would score a street from 3 to 0, 3 being maximum score and 0 being worst score. And these sort of photos from the left to the right rank in that order. So the photo on the left is a completely cleared, uncluttered space for walking of more than 2 meters, which allows for two people in wheelchairs to pass each other or travel alongside, or a person with a pushchair and a child next to them. And as you go down through the photographs down to the one second in with a very skinny, narrow footpath on one side of the road, or a typical sort of residential road we often find in WA where there's no footpaths at all, but a very long straight road. So while this, I've spoken to a few local councils about these type of roads. Sometimes I get a response from engineers saying, well, there's hardly any traffic down here, so you can just walk on the road, it's not a problem. But as you can see, it's quite... so yeah, so just, I spoke to a couple of council engineers for the typical roads on the right, and they just said, well, you can just walk on the road, it's fine, there's not much traffic. But as you can see, most roads are quite long and straight, and we stood out and had a look at some of the roads, and a few traffic that does drive down there drives beyond 50k an hour. So would you be comfortable as an older person walking down there, knowing that if a car does come down, they're going to be traveling quite fast? Hopefully they're doing the right thing and they're not looking at a phone or screaming at the kids in the back, just as they'll be driving past you. So again, to me, it's not an excuse, and we should always have a footpath for people to walk along, regardless of volume of traffic. And then this one is, again, it's just examples of shade. So we often talk about needing more shade, but what does that look like? We can see on the left a really nice shaded footpath that's nice and cool, especially in the heat of the summer, for people to walk along down and walk to school or walk to the local shops. And again, just progressively down to the right-hand side where there's hardly any shade at all, and it's a very hot, hostile environment. Being mindful, as James said, of trees and lifting up pavers and dropping leaves, but there is room for trees, and we just need to do that correctly. So adopting healthy streets can help prevent injury and help older people to get out and about and walk more, allowing us to have wider footpaths with no trip hazards, having slower speeds for safer crossing, safer infrastructure for people riding, safer crossing facilities, more shade and places to stop and rest as we need to. And then I'll just wrap up on an autonomous future and what will that provide. So we all hear a lot in the transport industry about autonomous vehicles coming on set, and what does that mean? So I've been doing quite a bit of work in the autonomous vehicle space. I've been working with the RAC since 2016 on autonomous vehicles. And we've been working on the IntelliBus in South Perth. For those that know of that trial, we took it down to Buffleton, we took it up to Geraldton, and we're also potentially taking it somewhere else in the regions at Point. I've also been working with some of the mines as well on autonomous vehicles. So I'm not going to go too much into that, so it's just one slide on that, but an autonomous future will no doubt provide a mobility solution to all who need door-to-door service. The RAC and IntelliBus trial and regional demonstrations have demonstrated how this technology will aid those with poor mobility or limited access to accessible public transport. However, we know that autonomous vehicles are also electric vehicles that make them very quiet and often difficult to detect without good eyesight or good hearing. Often hearing deteriorates as the person gets older, which can result in poor detection of an approaching autonomous vehicle or electric vehicle. So we just need to think about this technology as we go forward. I don't think there's anything we can really do to stop that technology going forward. It's been pushed a lot by developers and the non-traditional developers of Googles and the like, and Ubers. So they are coming. Probably more likely in the next few years, we'll see an autonomous fleet of vehicles rather than personal vehicles. So autonomous buses, autonomous trucks, autonomous taxis, things where you can control a fleet on a general set network. So they're going to be a good for those that need that door-to-door service. But yeah, we just need to understand how we can make sure that this technology is safe. So we often talk about technology needs to ensure future transport is universally connected. And we talk about vehicles speaking to each other and vehicle-to-vehicle technology. We also talk about infrastructure, vehicle-to-infrastructure. So vehicles detect signals, signals detect vehicles, and it all happens intuitively and it works. But we need to think about maybe connecting people to infrastructure and people to vehicles as well in a way of utilising technology to go forward. So that's something to consider for the mobility of older people. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much to Tim and Jane for their presentations. We do have just a few moments for questions. So do you have any questions online?
We have two questions on online. So there's a question that says, there are many types of parents and main road WA has existing guidelines for Australian roads. Has there been any investigation or discussion on the types of parents that older adults with disabilities and living people find it easier to step up or step over?
Jane, did you want to answer that one?
I didn't, the sound was not good enough for me to hear the question. I could hear a voice, but I couldn't understand what was being said. Perhaps if you could paraphrase the question for me.
It's about curbs and what's the preferred sort of curbing type for older people, stepping up and stepping down, because there's quite a few different curbs types out there in the industry.
Look, I'm not an expert on the standards around curb heights, but it obviously has to vary according to where you are. So, for example, if you're in the snow country and you have a lot of snow runoff and so on, I found in these country towns that they have very high curbs. So if you're parking your car, then getting from your car onto the curb can be quite difficult. So I'm not sure if that's the kind of situation that you're asking about, but in urban areas, I think there is a general standard, and I don't have the height of that, though. I'm not the technical expert on standards. Is that what you were asking, or have I missed the question completely?
No, I think that was a good answer. I'll just add to it. There seems to be a prevalence of using what they call semi-mountable curbs. So there's sort of flush mountable curbs that you can drive over, and there are barrier curbs which are more sort of perpendicular that you can't really drive over. And then we've got this half and half semi-mountable where it's kind of like you can drive over, but we don't want you to. And often they're used next to footpaths. So I personally, on personal preferences, that they're no good, because it's kind of saying we've got a footpath, but someone can walk up on the curb and onto the footpath if you want. So I don't really see the point of them when we're trying to encourage more people to walk safely. So to me, sort of semi-mountable curbs aren't really a good thing for people walking. And then crossing points, and the curbs at crossing points, there are the standards where you have to have anything between a 1 in 8 or 1 in 12 kind of ramp. Something I've learned off Jane through the work we've had is that we have a lot of these shared spaces where everything's flush. For step-free access, which is good for people that can't step up and step down, but they're no good for guide dogs. But guide dogs just learn to cross at a ramp with curbs. So as soon as we get rid of curbs, we're alienating a portion of people there. So we need to start looking at that shared space, step-free access design to see what we can do at crossing points to still allow people with guide dogs to cross there as well.
Yeah, Tim, I'm not sure if you were talking about what I call roll-top curbs, but I lived in a suburb where that was all new, and they'd done roll-top curbs everywhere, and I'm not in favour of those either. And my mother, on her small little motor scooter, got stuck with the bottom of with her wheels up on the footpath and one wheel down on the road, because she was wedged. Because the floor of the device had hit the top of the roll-top curb. Can I just say there's a question here that I like, and it's asking me if does the New South Wales government engage with us for input into its roads, footpaths, policies and guidelines. I wish. I wish. So the work that I was doing was mostly with local government, forgive the pun, where the rubber does hit the road. That is where all the action happens. And one of the things that I also found was it was all very well for the designer or the person in charge to say what needs to be done, but contractors tend to make their own arrangements when it comes to putting down the concrete. And the other thing I noticed was that council people did not go back and check them.
Yep, hang on. Yeah, come on. Yep.
Then I'm guessing there's a perception that all this work that we're suggesting costs lots of money. Is there any strategies when we're talking to local governments or those responsible for making changes to have an easier conversation about some of these design strategies not costing as much money as they think? Or at what point in time could we introduce some of these strategies, e.g. when they're changing, they have to do refurbishments anyway? Just thoughts on strategies to convince people, I guess.
Yeah, for me, we need to start getting these design principles into design documents for new builds, and then obviously we have a large network of local government networks that need to be retrofitted. If we can have healthy streets, and I've spoken to a few councils about it, if we can have healthy streets as a policy within local government policy, that whenever they're touching the road, whether they're just doing a resurface or replacing curbs or underground power, anytime they're touching the road environment, even if it's not a transport project, that they know they're going to have all the construction equipment out there and traffic management out there, so all the cost is there. That a council officer gets trained in healthy streets. They go out, they undertake a healthy street check while they're there, and then they can just say, okay, while we're out here, we're not going to gold plate everything. We haven't got the money for it, but we could just do with widening that footpath, or we could just do with adding a few more trees in, or just a couple of benches while we're out there. For me, I'd really like to see it starting to get into policy so we can do that sort of thing, and then it can be a less burden on cost and more just an add-on to projects they're already doing.
Yeah, I think if I can add in there, I think one of the issues that councils think about is not just the cost of the footpath, but then maintaining it, especially when the trees lift the pavers and footpath and whatever. But that is also due to poor quality footpaths where they get contractors who skimp on the concrete, they skimp on everything. And, you know, I live in a suburb that's not 20 years old, and they have replaced parts of the footpath on the other side of the road to me, sections of it twice now. And you know, so I think there's a lot of issues there in footpath design and that designing for maintenance prevention.
Sorry, so that question was, is it illegal for pedestrians to be asked to give way to cars?
No, it's not legal. No, so that sign of pedestrians give way to cars, we've got them all in WA and Subiaco and things like that. And they're usually added when, as James' example, when you have a raised plateau that looks and walks like a pedestrian crossing, but it's not legally signed as pedestrian crossing, then they add the sign in to say you can cross here, and we've provided you step-free access to cross, but you still got to give way to traffic because the road traffic code is that a pedestrian gives way to traffic unless it's turning. So it's kind of a, you know, we're not sure who gives way to who, so we'll impede the pedestrian rather than the person sitting in a nice air-conditioned vehicle. So yeah, it's just a silly little quirk, whereas if we just put a few stripes on top of that raised crossing, it would have been then priority for pedestrian and not the car. So, but then it comes down to warrants and main roads not wanting to impede traffic, so you want to by allowing people to cross the road. So this whole circular thing of planning for vehicles and not people, which I don't mind on the big arterial roads, but just on the local roads, you know, it needs to be flipped.
Yes, so there's a question here about the preferred term being older people and sort of how did that come about? Well, mainly from older people themselves. The issue here is that when you label, you run the risk of stereotyping. So it comes in line with saying people with disability, putting the person first, people who are blind or have low vision, people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And so now we don't say people who are old, we just say older people. So that's how the preferred term has come into being. And I think as the baby boomers come through, the fact that they're having to rename senior citizen centres or do away with them altogether is an indication that the term seniors is not something that baby boomers relate to. Certainly not a large group of them. And there are some cultures where the term elderly or senior is seen as a sign of respect, but in the general Australian culture, it runs the risk of sidelining and marginalising people with that label.
I actually have a couple of questions. Does the Healthy Streets framework work in the context of car parks? And the reason I ask this is because in our 2022 Falls report that Injury Matters has put out, there was a significant increase in falls in car parks, and I think the numbers were around about 7,000 hospitalisations from falls. So I just wondered whether you have any either insights into that, or whether or not this sort of work we can start to work in those areas with people who are managing those car parks.
Yeah, so Healthy Streets per se, or the design check tool per se, wouldn't really apply to a car park, because some of the big parameters for Healthy Streets design check is traffic speed, amount of heavy vehicles, amount of vehicles. So in a car park, the traffic speed is probably quite low normally anyway, so you wouldn't really see much of a change. But there is a process or an approach called human-centered car parking, where you look at exactly making sure that there's bush surfaces for no trip hazards. There's plenty of walking space and crossing space across car park aisles. So you can definitely design car parks to be more sort of person-friendly, I guess, through that. But again, like Jane said, I think a lot of the issues in car parks is just maintenance. They're just where the amount of vehicles turning through is what wears up the surface. And if it's not frequently maintained or built correctly in the first place, that's where I think a lot of the trips might happen.
I'd like to also see colour contrasts in wheel stops, where there's an open car park. Someone can be really focused on where they're going and not detect a wheel stop that doesn't have a car attached to it.
Yes, yeah. I've actually seen a couple of accessible parking spots where they actually have to walk on the road because those bollards are actually in the way. So I think there's a bit of work to do there as well. So one last question. So from our perspective, who do we begin working with? So are there state associations or organisations that we can advocate to, or do we need to go to the individual organisations and local governments, or are there already advocacy activities that we can support?
Definitely advocacy activities underway through various different things, Victoria Walks and Streets for People I'm a board on, and various other groups advocating for this sort of stuff. But for me, it's working directly with local government. I think we've probably everyone in the room has worked with state government and tried to work with state government to get change happening, and it's quite a long, slow process. With local government, I always feel like you can get things quicker if you go to the right space. And I was chatting to someone yesterday about the summit yesterday, and I attend a lot of other sort of transport and road safety conferences, which are really good, but often it is just preaching to the converted as well. So we really need to get the elected members of local government in a room to get them to hear this sort of stuff, to get them here to understand why, maybe to do a bit more work around the cost of things, to show them that it's not going to be a burden on cost for their electorate. And as soon as we can get the people that kind of make the decisions on board with this stuff, then I think that's better in local government. So.
Yeah, from my perspective, it is a matter of, I mean, every local government area, I think, has an access and inclusion committee of some sort. Some of them do have a committee specifically of older people that you can talk with. Obviously, the Council Council on the Ageing, COTA WA is obviously another organisation. The success of what I did with local government came from having people understand the why. And the best way for people to understand why, at council level staff, is to actually interact with older people, which was what was happening in the workshops I was running. And what they found was not only did they hear the issues that older people had, the older people came up with the solutions at the same time. And then also older people would find out what the council issues were, and then between them they could manage to come up with some solutions. So the idea of co-design, of working together, is not one of you know, I've lost my autonomy as a designer or a policy maker. It is actually one where it's a very learning experience for everyone in the room.
Yeah, extremely good point, Jane. Thank you so much. Co-design is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that concludes our seminar today. I just wanted to put up the upcoming training and events, and there is a flyer with this information. And I just wanted to particularly bring to your attention our Keeping Dementia in Mind, Preventing Falls by Creating Dementia-Friendly Homes. So I think that definitely relates to some of the conversations today. And we are partnering with Dementia Training Australia for the delivery of that on the 6th of June. So it would be great if you're interested to attend that workshop. So just finally, our next steps, if you want to keep the conversation going from today, we have our Injury Prevention Network. You can sign up by sending an email, and it's listed there for you. So the Injury Prevention Network meets quarterly. We actually met this morning. We provide professionals such as yourselves working in the injury prevention space across WA with an opportunity to connect with each other and share learnings and solutions in injury prevention and safety promotion. So send us an email if you're interested in finding out more information about that. You can register for Connected, which is our online networking program for professionals working in the injury prevention space. You are randomly paired bi-monthly to have a 15-minute catch-up conversation with another professional working in injury prevention, and it's a really amazing way not just to increase your network, but to find out what other organisations are doing in the injury prevention space. And finally, we'd love to hear your feedback about what you thought about today's training. So there's an evaluation survey in your participant packs, or if you're online, a survey will pop up on your screen when the webinar has concluded. We do take into all your feedback on board so we can ensure we're delivering the sector support that we need to. So please do take the time to fill that out for us. Thank you for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.